Alright, YouTube, it's time for unpopular opinion time, specifically to do with climate change. Now, I have spoken about this before. I don't remember if I dedicated an actual video to it or mentioned it in passing, but I'll tell you why I don't care about the climate change issue. Regardless of, is anthropic climate change real, is it not real, okay? Who cares? It doesn't make any difference. There's a simple reason why. Let alone for the moment the fact that scientists have already proclaimed we've gone over the Rubicon and there's no stopping it now, and we would have to go completely carbon neutral worldwide to solve the problem, which obviously isn't going to happen, at least in the next 100 years or so. If man-made climate change is not real, just to argue devil's advocate here if you believe that it is. If it's not real, then there's nothing you can do about it. It's some sort of natural warming and cooling trend, so you probably still are worried about it. It means that over not too long spans of time within human time frames, a great deal can get fucked up. You have coastal regions flood, and then you have an ice age eventually. That's certainly going to hurt mankind. Maybe things become temporarily considerably less habitable upon this planet. I will say this. You should be happy that we're in a warmer rather than a cooler period, because it seems like human misery skyrockets during those colder periods. Look at the Maunder minimum or something like that. Not a nice time to be alive. Medieval warm period, yeah, things get a little bit better, let's face it, even though those people were still living in dirt-floored shacks mostly at the time. If man-made climate change is real, and the post-mid-1800s warming trend that we've seen is indeed caused by CO2 specifically, more or less, and man's emissions, man's activity, we are doomed. If this is an aberrance, then one of two things is true. Either there is a feedback of some sort within nature that will compensate for it, possibly quickly plunging us into an ice age, which, by the way, is why I would say we're doomed either way. Or there's no feedback mechanism. This world will steadily heat up. It will desertify further. Some areas will remain habitable for some time, but ultimately it'll be little more than some humid swamps that'll be pushing 150 degrees with steaming oceans, massive storms, and generally a lot of deserts and a lot of screwed up shit. It won't even resemble Earth as it is now, maybe 1,000 years from now or something. Either way, we are doomed, because there's nothing we can do about it. The reason I say that is this. Look at the premise of the climate change argument and why we need to do something about it. The premise is, around the mid-1800s, anthropic warming began. That is, there were temperature anomalies that have been continuous since then that are not accounted for by natural warming processes. You would think of perhaps a more slow warming. And that this is the result specifically of CO2 emissions, as well as emissions of other greenhouse gases. Methane has been mentioned. Cattle farming is potentially a big problem. By the way, you can reduce that emission by changing what you feed them. That'd probably be a lot better than going after coal or something. It'd probably prevent more climate change if it's true. And I'll preface this by saying I am an environmentalist. I do believe we need to start cleaning up all the trash in the world. There's a big floating island the size of Texas of flotsam out in the Pacific. We need to clean it all up. We need to stop polluting with heavy metals. We need to stop using toxic materials as much as possible. We do need to seriously think about whether we can even continuously inhabit the planet at our current density, let alone increase densities over time. We need to look at trying to reverse desertification. We do need to worry about weather patterns. We certainly do need to recycle. We certainly do need to have a clean world. Nobody wants to breathe smog. Nobody wants to drink polluted water. That's just the way that it is. It's a good thing. Taking care of the world is a good thing. I would say the same about emissions. Anytime that we're changing the composition of the atmosphere, even by a small amount, we do run risks. So I would say these are all good ideas, but if anthropic climate change specifically is correct, if their surmisings are right, we as a species will probably not survive another 10,000 years. And we as a species probably cannot do anything about it no matter how draconian it is. Reason why. If it is real, whether there's a feedback mechanism that plunges us potentially into an ice age, or whether there's none and we just spiral out of control, getting warmer and warmer. There's no way to reverse it. Why? Because when it supposedly began back in the late 1800s, there was relatively little industry on this planet and the population was a hell of a lot lower. China alone today produces more CO2 emissions than the entire world did when the anthropic climate change supposedly began. So unless you're going to tell me that the entire world somehow is going to slash all of its emissions, I'm not just talking about CO2 from cars or coal and oil and things like that. I'm also talking emissions from other sources, agricultural sources. I'm talking about the production of fertilizer that's used to feed the whole world. I'm talking about the CO2 that people just breathe out just by existing. I'm talking about cattle and pig and goat and sheep farms and things like that. All of those create pollution. Unless you're going to tell me that we can slash that total amount by about 98%, we're doomed because it'll continue. We can slow it down, but what's the point? So we last a few more generations. Still screwed. What's the difference whether our grandchildren inherit a ruined earth or our great-great-grandchildren inherit a ruined earth? What's the difference between these two situations? Either way, mankind's at hazard of no longer existing. Either way, we're going to be seen as evil monsters for having screwed everything up. What I think we need to do is clean up the world. We need to get rid of sources of pollution. No more landfills. We don't need that. We need to look at making things more biodegradable. We certainly do need reforestation. We do need to clean the ocean. We need to stop emitting so much nitrate, especially into the oceans of the world. We've created dead zones out there. The oceans are acidifying. We do need cleaner air. We do need to filter things at the source. We need to invest in efficiency. We do need to look at other ways to get energy that are less polluting. We do need to dredge up all that crap that we've left behind for the last 1,000 years and try to purify it to get the soil decontaminated. We need to stop using nuclear at our earliest possible convenience so we don't have more Chernobyls and Fukushimas. That's great. I agree with all these things. We need to protect threatened and endangered species. We probably do as a world need to eat less meat. It's less efficient than most farming. But that being said, it won't save us. If man-made climate change is real, then in 5 or 6 generations, more or less, there won't be anybody left to watch these videos. Man's automated systems will continue lingering on for a while, and maybe 1,000 years later, some aliens, some extraterrestrials will come and find what's left. Most of it will be degraded into nothingness, because we'll have ruined the world either way. We'll have either caused a feedback loop that causes an ice age, or we will have caused the world to warm out of control, and it will become uninhabitable. So if it's real, we've already destroyed ourselves, essentially, unless we intend to put ourselves aboard some sort of rocket, send it out into space to some other habitable planet, and hopefully we can persist there for a longer period of time, which doesn't seem currently within our realm of technology. Some humans will survive. We may evolve, too, to compensate. But it probably would take longer for us to do that because we tend to be slower at reproducing than, say, a bacterium or a mouse or something along those lines. It would probably destroy mankind if it's real. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm certainly worried about pollution. I'm certainly worried about keeping the air and the water clean and living in balance with nature. But if it is man-made, if climate change, which is real, I don't dispute that at all. It clearly is. We do see change over time in our temperature and so forth. If it's man-made, or primarily man-made, we're fucked. There's nothing you're going to do about it. You're never going to get all the other nations to do what the U.S. and EU do. Say the U.S. and EU go completely carbon neutral. We no longer create any emissions of any kind. We scrap cattle farms and everything else and go back to living like hobbits. Doesn't matter. China will be producing more pollution alone. India will be producing more pollution alone. Mexico will be producing, I believe, more pollution alone than the entire world did when anthropic climate change supposedly began. The population of China is greater than that of the population of most of the world, I believe, back during that period of time. Wasn't the world population about 2 billion at that point? Well, about 2 billion people in China. What about India? India's getting up there above a billion as well. There's probably nothing that we can do about it if it's real. Thankfully, I am somewhat skeptical that it is, because I look at this warming trend and I say, yeah, that's a nice little spike there, but at the same time, it looks like things were almost this warm during the medieval period when human industry didn't really exist. We weren't using oil at that point, unless you count the Greek fire bombs, those little naphtha bombs or whatever they were that everyone talks so much about and still can't fully replicate. They didn't have such a conception. They didn't have a rail industry or any of the other warm periods like coincided with most of the Roman Empire's period of existence. As far as we can tell, yeah, they weren't driving cars around in ancient Rome. I'm sure that the Caesar would have found that very amusing indeed. I am skeptical about whether climate change is primarily man-made. I'm sure that the emissions we do create do have an effect upon the climate, but what proportion is man-made? I haven't seen that debate settled. I look back at pre-industrial times and see there appears to have been a great deal of variation, ultimately in temperature and climate over time anyway, and that was accomplished by nature in not much more time than this recent spike. This could just be a data aberrance. And it looks also like it's leveled out now, like the world is no longer warming at the same trend anyway. Maybe we're going to top out for a few decades, and by the time I'm approaching old age, things are going to go back down and get really, really cold. In which case, they'll probably bring back the theory that was going in the 70s of the next ice age being soon, and they'll say we need to cut emissions because it's causing cooling or something, probably. So no, I'm ambivalent about the issue. I support green energy, I support conservation, I support cutting off pollution in every possible way that we can without completely screwing our economy. But focusing on anthropic climate change instead of pollution and deforestation and things like that, I think is a bad idea going forward. I know that that's a fairly unpopular opinion, including among some people that probably generally support my channel. But look at the actual historical data. Look at the mid-1800s. The amount of emissions there are less than some single countries now produce. You're not going to stop it from happening if anthropic climate change indeed exists. That's about all. Peace out.